Welcome to Hope in the Future with Pastor Ben Foxworth. Check in with us here regularly to hear God's words of instruction and encouragement. And now, here's Pastor Ben.
It is for some that I have spoken to and that I have read about and listened. It's been kind of a rough week in many different areas. And really things have been snowballing in our world so much that it is so easy to feel like evil is triumphing. And it is so easy to think maybe it's just best if I hide under the covers and hope that evil eventually will stop triumphing. And what happens is because we are so weary, because we're so tired, because we're so frustrated, because we feel so helpless at times, that it's easy to want to disengage. Even though the battle rages on, the enemy still has his influence in the world. There are still millions of people that need to hear the gospel of who Jesus is and what he's done and how we can be saved. But even though as the battle rages on, it can be tempting to just disconnect. And it is a reminder that we're going to read today. The battle is never going to be over in this world. There's never going to be a time in this world where all of a sudden all the bad stuff is going to go away and then we are just going to be happy on our own. It's never going to happen in this world. But we do know God wins. We do know that Jesus wins. And we do know that Jesus is returning. But in the meantime, what do we do? How do we be prepared for these times when it just seems like we are so helpless or we're so broken, when the battle is so completely over our heads? I've mentioned this before. It's always an interesting thing. Callie and I were having an amusing conversation because I don't remember if it was the beginning of this week or last week that the Powerball was up to like $1 billion or something like that. And Callie and I were talking about what we would do if we had $1 billion. And really, it was just, we'd probably buy some more kitchen stuff. That's really kind of as far as it really got. I mean, we might get a new kitchen table and the chairs are getting rickety, but other than that, we really didn't have a plan. But what's interesting is if you do any kind of reading and you find out about these people that win these huge jackpots, it is so depressing to find that the majority of them are literally bankrupt within 2 years. And I can't understand that. I mean, if I won a jackpot of millions of dollars, I know that it would be at least 3 years for me. But what has happened is because when these people win this big giant amount and all of a sudden they're given this huge giant windfall, they're not ready for it. They're not ready. They're not prepared. They've not really done. We all dream about what would happen if something like that happened, but very few people actually make the things happen that need to be planned out. And what happens is that all of a sudden somebody who didn't have anything in their bank now has millions of dollars in the bank, and they think that it's forever. They don't understand that there's still a limited amount of funds, even though those funds seem to be huge, and they're not prepared. They're not ready. And I think that happens to us in our lives and in our ministries as well. If you've been paying attention what we've been talking about here over these last few months, there's been messages about preparation. Preparation for service. Preparation for ministry. Preparation for working for the kingdom. Preparation in our lives for spiritual warfare. Last week we talked about the idea of the view of the mountain, that it's a big long drive to drive from here over to the other side of the state, but there's that moment when you get up to that hill and gorge on the freeway, and you look over and you see Mount Rainier if it's a clear day, and you're like, that's the destination. You still have a big drive to go, but you see the destination. And that's what, for us as believers, that is a picture of the spiritual life, of the Christian life. That we are going, and sometimes we need to be reminded that's where we're headed, but there's still a drive ahead of us. There's still work to be done before we get to our destination. There's still planning and awareness that's needed. And it's all for the gospel. And the gospel is, quite simply, Jesus came to forgive and heal sinners. Let's go from mountain view to a mountaintop. Has anybody ever had what's called a mountaintop experience? Usually, if you grew up in the church, you went to youth camp. You went to youth camp when you were a teenager. And usually what would happen is when you'd go to youth camp, there's always these incredible times when you're with all these like-minded teenagers the same age as you when you're a kid, and you have this incredible experience, and everybody's so excited about the Lord. And it's a mountaintop experience. But what happens is when you get back, and a lot of that deals with the fact that, kids are secluded together. There's a lot of adrenaline. There's a lot of emotion. But what ends up happening when you get back and Monday morning comes around, it's time to go back to school, or time to go back to work, and then you see the world is still the world. The rest of the world hasn't had a mountaintop experience over the last weekend. And so it's so easy to grow discouraged when you come back and you're faced with the same temptations. You're faced with the same issues that you had before you went onto the mountaintop experience. But I know for me that I would sometimes come back from some of those experiences and I'm feeling like it was just some of the greatest times of my life, and then almost immediately entering some of the most lowest points of my life because reality was setting in. That's why you hear about marriages in the first year and why so many marriages dissolve within the first year. It's because all of the excitement, the emotion is gone, and now it's time you're seeing things in a realistic perspective. And sometimes, again, if couples haven't prepared, if they've not been counseled, if they've not been if they've not had plans to whether it's financial or whatever, sometimes when they look at each other, they begin to loathe one another. And marriages in the first year is when the highest rates of divorce happen. And then I can tell you that as a pastor, that I have seen some wonderful things on Sunday. And then on Monday, I'm wondering, was it all worth it? That's what happens when we go to this top of the mountain, and if we're not prepared and we get to the bottom of that mountain again, we can run into problems. We can run into some frustrating things. And nowhere is this illustrated more perfectly than in the prophetic ministry of Elijah. Nowhere do we see in the Bible, there's a lot of bad guys in the Bible. And we're going to be reading about one of the worst of the worst today. And it is so easy to see evil seem like it's vanquishing, it's doing good, not doing good things, it's succeeding is what I'm meaning. And it is so easy to think, I'm going to throw my hands up because there's nothing I can do. But I want to talk about Elijah. Let's talk about Elijah. Elijah was a prophet. And he was one bad dude. And he knew, bad dude in a good way. And he knew his stuff. And in his time in this world, he would go and he would warn of God's wrath for a long time. He had seen God's power and provision come alive. And he had a connection with God that we would love to be able to say that we could have. And let me tell you, as we talk about Elijah, sometimes just like with anybody else that we read about in the Bible, we can have this idea that these men and women in the Bible that God uses, they were on this higher spiritual plane than what we're on. But that's not true. Elijah was a flawed man, just like all of us are. He had his successes and victories, and he had his failures and defeats. James chapter 5, verse 17 says, Elijah was a human being as we are, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and for 3 years and 6 months it did not rain on the land. Elijah was no different than us. And that means that the same God that did powerful things through the prophet Elijah still can work through us today for his purposes. And he came on the scene as Israel is being torn apart by the worship of this Canaanite god named Baal. And Elijah made it clear that he made it clear to the people of Israel to have no other gods before the one true God. Now, the worship of Baal had been around now for about 400 years at this point. 400 years earlier, Gideon was dealing with the Baalites. And here, it's still happening. The Canaanites, as a matter of fact, are intermarrying with the Israelites, and any time you get a mixed combo like that of I worship God, I worship a false god, they get together, it is going to be the one that worships the false god that's going to have the influence eventually. That's just how it happens, because compromise happens here and there. And so this has been going on, and now it is a very serious threat to Israel, who is in tatters right now. Spiritual tatters, spiritual disarray all through Israel. And so Elijah's going to prove to the people of Israel once and for all the uselessness of worshiping Baal. And even more importantly, he was going to show once and for all the power of God Almighty. So what happens, we read about it in 1 Kings chapter 18. Let me just summarize what happens in 1 Kings 18. It all happened on the top of a mountain. This is the first mountaintop experience. Ahab and 450 prophets, they were all up there. Many of the Israelites had come up there as well to watch this. But there's this wicked king named Ahab. He's married to a wicked woman named Jezebel. And this wicked king Ahab, he has 450 prophets of Baal. And it's going to be an old-fashioned showdown. My God can beat your God. And so here's the challenge that's put forth. What's going to happen is they're going to take a bull, and they're going to cut up a bull. They're going to do the sacrifice of a bull, and after they've killed this bull, cut it up, they're going to put it on a piece of wood, and they're going to call on their God for fire. Elijah's going to call on his God, Yahweh, and the Baalites, the prophets of Baal, are going to call on their God for fire, to set fire to this sacrifice that's on this wood. So the Baalites go first. And so what happens is they go out there and they start doing their thing. They pray all day. Nothing. They cut themselves and do all of this performative ritual dancing. Nothing. They do all of this stuff and they continue. All 450 prophets of Baal, all calling on the name of Baal to bring fire down on this sacrifice. Nothing's happening. Now Elijah's watching this, and it even says this. You can check my math and look in 1 Kings 18. He says, wait, maybe your God's taking a potty break. Maybe Baal's in the bathroom. Maybe you need to yell louder, because nothing seems to be happening with your God here. And so, they got serious at that point. And they did this frenzied worship where they got themselves into such a huge frenzy, and they started once again cutting themselves and cutting each other, and they're just becoming a bloody mess with one another, and nothing's happening. Elijah says, okay, My turn. Are you watching, Israel? He wants to make sure that the people from Israel that are up there are watching this. He wants to make sure that this message goes out for everybody. So what he does is that he repairs this altar, and as he repairs the altar, it's sending a message that this is going to be right worship. And so then he has the bowl on the altar. And so what happens is he says to his assistants, go ahead and let's throw some water on this. Well, you don't want to do that. We're trying to set the thing on fire. You throw water on there, that's going to kind of defeat the purpose, isn't it? Throw a little water on there. As a matter of fact, throw 4 buckets of water. Throw 4 buckets of water on this sacrifice. There's water everywhere. I mean, it is drenched. And then in 1 Kings 18, verse 36 and 37, Elijah gives a simple yet sincere prayer. It says, at the time for offering the evening sacrifice, the prophet Elijah approached the altar and said, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I'm your servant, and that at your word I have done all these things. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, the Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. And what happened? God sent down fire from heaven that started that sacrifice on fire. All of that water meant nothing to the fire from God. Boom, it explodes in fire. And then before anything else can happen, Elijah looks over at these prophets of Baal and says to the Israelite forces, go get them. Take them out. They went, they took the prophets of Baal out, and Ahab cried wee, wee, wee all the way home. What an experience. What an incredible moment. Elijah did what he did. He was faithful. He was obedient. God showed up in a big and glorious way. But as I said earlier, King Ahab, he had a mean old nasty wife named Jezebel. It's interesting, I'm starting to hear Jezebel come back as a name. For the longest time, I mean, that has been like an insult of a name, Jezebel. Jezebel was a bad woman. So Ahab sees all of this. And Elijah knew that Ahab had seen all of this. And so Elijah has to be feeling good. God showed up right on time. The people cast off all these confusion. They bow and they worship the Lord. The Baalite prophets are no more. And Ahab is running home to mama. Things are good. And surely when Ahab gets back home to that mean old nasty woman, he's going to report that the God of the Israelites is the one true God, and Elijah's mission will have been completed. This was about to be mission accomplished. Baal was dead. As a matter of fact, he had never lived. Long live the one true God, Yahweh. What a great victory. He trusted in God to deliver. God kept his promises. But now let's see what happens next. Let's read in chapter 19 together. I want us just to start with verses 1 through 4. Ahab told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, may the gods punish me, and do so severely if I don't make your life like the one of them by this time tomorrow. Then Elijah became afraid and immediately ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba that belonged to Judah, he left his servant there. But he went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a broom tree and prayed that he might die. He said, I have had enough. Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. What? In the victory, in this incredible victory, Elijah was defeated, or felt defeated. He had rumbled with 450 men, and one note from one evil woman decimated him. He had thought that he had wiped out Baal and everything associated with it forever, and that the people would all come to know the one true God. And Jezebel sends him a postcard. And it sends him reeling. And it's safe to say that Elijah had thought for sure that what had happened on Mount Carmel was going to be the tipping point. But Ahab didn't report to Jezebel what God had done. He reported what Elijah had done. So she sends this little card that says, just like these guys are dead, you're going to be like that tomorrow. And Elijah falls down, defeated and fearful. Why? Well, maybe he thought that since Ahab and Jezebel weren't changed, that the people would remain unchanged. Maybe he even feared that maybe God wasn't enough. So he goes off to his hiding place. He begins to discredit his own ministry, and he asks God to just end it all. He's not suicidal. He just wanted God to snuff out his light. He just didn't want to live in this dark, depraved world anymore. Now, what should have happened is that when he got Jezebel's little telegram, he should have just laughed. He should have laughed because her gods just got exposed as powerless. But instead of chuckling, verse 3, it tells us that he ran for his life. Just hours earlier, he is on this emotional high. And now, because of somebody's evil statement, he is knocked down flat. And he is headed into an emotional tailspin. Fear replaced his faith. I want to remind you, if you are a believer of Christ, I want to remind you that the enemy will not attack dead outposts. That the more that we as a church or as individuals, the more we grow closer to God and His Word, the more that we grow closer to God as we pray, the more we go closer, the more we are going to have a bullseye on us from the enemy. When we're working for the kingdom, there's going to be targets. And what happens is so many times there's this spiritual depression that comes after great victories. I've seen it in my life. I've seen it in other pastors' lives. I've seen it in churches where there has been some great big things that has happened. Great big things that God has done. And yet right after there's hopelessness, there's depression, there's feeling like, what was it all about? And there are three things that within Elijah that are working against him. One of them is that he was exhausted. He had been seeing his entire life all of the things that the prophets of Baal were doing. He had been seeing his entire life Israel and so many of the Israelites prostituting themselves to this false religion of a false god. He had been seeing all of these things happen forever. It was wearying to watch. And now, with what has happened, he's exhausted. He's literally running for his life. He ran all the way from Jezreel to Beersheba, which is about 70 miles. And he was already exhausted from his confrontation with these 450 prophets of Baal, and this 70-mile sprint only exhausted him further. He had used everything that he thought he had to wipe out Baalism. He thought he left it all in the ring, as the fighters say. But what was really difficult to swallow is that after all of his efforts, he gets that postcard, he gets that little telegram from Jezebel, and it doesn't seem like there was any lasting change that happened at all. So he is wondering, I don't have anything in the tank. What more can I give? So how about you in your lives, in your walks with Christ? Does the evil of this world overwhelm you? into a paralysis of sorts? Are you tired because you feel alone? Do factors like time and age, and do they discourage you because you think you've had too little of the former and too much of the latter? Are you too tired? Are you just hoping for a rest for a while? It is not wrong that you're exhausted, but it's important that you admit that you're exhausted and allow God to give you the rest that He wants to give you. Ultimately, the rest of Jesus Christ, who is promised as our Sabbath rest. He is our rest. And for those of us in Jesus, that we know that there's going to come a day when our rest will be eternal. But in this world, there's still things that we can be doing to allow ourselves to feel refreshed and not let exhaustion, spiritual exhaustion, overtake us. One of the things that I encourage you to do is to disconnect from the media, is to disconnect from social media. If I had a mirror, disconnect from social media. Because I'm telling you right now that everything is ginned up to make you angry. Everything is ginned up to give you doom and gloom. That's what the media wants to sell. That's what social media often sells. Disconnect from that and connect with the Word of God. Connect with one another in the church. And the next thing that Elijah is facing is this disillusionment. Disillusionment. I think the best way to explain disillusionment is with a magic trick. So I want you all to know that I have developed the power to read, to read minds and to know where things are. I have this incredible magical ability to do that. Hannah, I want you right now to give me a number between 1 and 7. Just give me a number between 1 and 7. 6, okay. Mr. Ed, would you stand up, please? Hannah, go over to, you see Mr. Ed back there? Go over to him right now. Put your crayons down and go over to see Mr. Ed. Mr. Ed, have you ever met Hannah before? Well, you guys will meet each other. Hannah, Mr. Ed. All right, Mr. Ed, I want you to pull out of your pocket right now a little yellow piece of paper. Would you hand that over to Hannah? Hannah, would you read that out loud to people?
I knew you'd pick 7.
Wow!
Good job. Practices.
So here's the thing. So you might think, okay, Ben, you got some magic powers. I don't. I set that trick up a long time ago. As a matter of fact, if she would have picked another number, I would have sent her over here to the Kleenex box. And underneath the Kleenex box, there would have been a little note that said, I knew you'd pick 2. There's one here underneath this Kleenex box here that if she would have said, I knew you'd pick 3. Tom has one in his pocket. What does it say, Tom? That you're in there too? So, I mean, it's just a silly magic trick. It's not real, but I created the illusion for a moment there that I might know what I was talking about when it was all just a trick. Now, here's the thing, is that just a silly trick, but I can't ever do that with y'all anymore, because when I try to do that, y'all are going to, we know your little game, Ben, You have been disillusioned. I offered this illusion, and you were disillusioned. And that's what disillusionment really, that's where it comes from. The only way that you can become disillusioned is if you are believing in an illusion. And an illusion is never real. It is just something that you think that you're seeing. It is something that it's some kind of sleight of hand or some kind of information that you've received that's not correct. And for whatever reason, you're believing in an illusion, and there comes a time when you don't believe that anymore. Now, the problem is that we become illusioned with people. We become illusioned with churches. We become illusioned with things in this world. And when things don't happen, or we find out that these people that we have this great illusion about, that they're not really good people or what have you, we can become disillusioned. And disillusionment will always follow illusion. And this is why we have to be careful about putting people on pedestals. This is because we're always going to be let down when we see their imperfections. In our lives, delusionment happens when we see that what we thought was going to happen, even with all the success we've seen, doesn't happen. And then we think, oh, maybe my success was a lie. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. 2019 was a really good year for me. There was some good years positively for me. There was some things that I had learned about myself that were really good. There was some great health that was happening. There was a great time of me getting healthy and feeling really good physically and spiritually. And then as 2020 began, things just seemed to be rolling so smooth. The things at my previous church, it's like, this is what I have been waiting for. All of this wonderful stuff is happening in the beginning of 2020. I don't remember exactly what it was that happened in 2020. But something happened, we all remember, don't we? And all of a sudden, everything just seemed to be so broken. Everything that I thought was happening didn't happen. And I found myself into such a dark place. I was depressed. I was angry. I was frustrated because it's like, God, I'm doing everything that you've wanted me to do, and can you at least give me some kind of indication of that it's not been in waste, and just feeling so disillusioned. But I had to realize something. I had to realize that my disillusionment was a sign that I had created an illusion of what success was, and not necessarily what God had wanted. I was tuned into my own idea of what God's blessing should be. Elijah's illusion was at Mount Carmel. That should be the final climax of the battle against Baalite paganism. Evil has been vanquished here. That's what his illusion was. And Mount Carmel was a breakthrough. And what happened on Mount Carmel was a big victory in the battle. But old nasty Jezebel, she was a tough chick. And she wasn't going down without a fight. Elijah thought that the matter was closed. And when it wasn't, depression set in. Anxiety set in. Discouragement set in. And he began to ask these questions. Who am I? Questions that we've asked at times when we have been faced with something that has discouraged us. Who am I? Do I have what it takes? Am I lying to myself? And do you have those questions? Maybe you've had those questions this week. Maybe you've been struggling with these questions for a while. And I want you to remember the way to battle disillusionment in your life is to remember what's true. Remember what's true. And the third thing Elijah is wrestling with is this really distorted perspective. This exhaustion and this disillusionment, it leads to this despair. Has anybody ever experienced despair before? I hate despair. I hate that feeling of it's all falling apart. It's all over. And there ain't, as my late father used to say, any dadgum thing you can do about it. I hate that feeling of despair. Elijah forgot the victory of Carmel. He forgot God's mighty hand. And he could only think of Jezebel. And in his pain, he made Jezebel bigger than God. Has your pain altered your view of reality? Do you have despair that feels like it's so deep that it's even hard to pray because you're afraid of just hearing silence from God? And if you do pray, you find yourself just begging Him to take you away from the struggle. And what happens is when people are in despair, do you know what they end up doing? They end up breaking away from others. When Christians are in despair, they end up breaking away from the church. Elijah felt so bad, he thought everyone was against him. In verses 10 and 14, he tells God that he is the only one that's still faithful. Elijah was having a pity party of one. Here's the thing about the enemy. The enemy wants to drive you away from the very people that can help you. The enemy wants to drive you away from the God of the universe, who created the universe, who knows every hair on your head. The enemy wants to drive you away from God. And what the enemy likes to do is he likes to shove you into fear and into paranoia. We all have problems. Some of us have big problems. Some of us are experiencing small problems. I heard this from somebody a long time ago, and I've always thought this was wise. Do you know the difference between a big problem and a small problem? Because a big problem is anything that I'm going through, and a small problem is anything that you're going through. We think that our problems are all the biggest problems. And if we isolate ourselves from others, what happens is that we become an easy target for the enemy's discouragement because we believe that our problem is bigger than God. I love the Bible's constant theme of a perfect, mighty God using an imperfect, weak people. It's another picture of His love for us. It's one of the things that we talk about on Wednesday nights at 6:30. We sometimes think, when we read about the people in the Old Testament, or we read about the people in the New Testament, we sometimes think that they're spiritually superhuman. But they're just like us, and we're just like them. While the Old Testament points ahead to Jesus, many of the stories in there are also written to give us hope. Romans 15:4 reminds us, "For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through endurance and the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope." The Scriptures give us hope. The stories of old in Scripture gives us hope. And this verse can be looked at in both the context of the Old and the New Testament. The things that we're experiencing right now are not new to God. Our problems that we're experiencing in our lives are not new. We may think that our problems are unique to ourselves, but there has been someone who's gone through what we're going through now. And God ministered to them in their situation, and He does the same for us. The same God that dealt with the people that we read about in the Bible deal with us today. God ministered to their needs. He will minister to our needs. One of Satan's biggest lies is that we're alone, or no one else will ever struggle like you. That's what temptation is. Temptation is, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal. And then when we succumb, the enemy's right there. You're the only one that went through that. You're the only one that would have ever done something stupid like that. That's his lie. But we know we can have hope because of the Word. We know though how God has dealt with the people that have been in despair like we may be. Are you frightened? Is there something in your life that's gotten out of control? Are you worried because there seems to be an uprising of evil and it just seems to be cascading into a giant snowball and there's nothing we can do about it? Think about 3 guys by the name of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're told All they got to do is just throw a little salt on a little idol. That's all they got to do. And when they say no, they're going to face a fiery furnace. The furnace that is so hot, and they're going to be thrown right into that furnace. Imagine that fear. But God was there. As the Bible states, if God is with us, who can be against us? Are you being treated unfairly? Maybe there's some unfairness that's going on, some injustice going on in your life. What about Joseph? He was treated unfairly. He was treated unfairly by his brothers. He was treated unfairly by Potiphar's wife, by Potiphar himself, and the list goes on and on and on. Yet his hope was in God. And he rose from prison to be the second most powerful man in Egypt, because that's what God had for him. Maybe you're struggling with some depression. Maybe you're struggling with some great remorse of sin. And I would point you to King David in the Bible and how God continued to keep his head high. And these stories and more are given to us so that we can have hope. Hope in God. Knowing that he's still there, that he still cares for his children, because none of our problems are new. God has seen them before, and maybe the outcome is going to be different than what we see in the Bible, but let us know where our hope is. We have assurance that all things work together for the good of God. Let's keep reading in verses 5 through 8 in chapter 19. Then he laid out under the bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. He's going to a whole different mountain. Here's what's important to understand. When Elijah was feeling weak, when Elijah was feeling full of despair, when he started in on his pity party, God didn't do like General George S. Patton did and slap him. He didn't slap Elijah and say, "You can act like a man." What does he do? He ministers to Elijah. And God's not on his throne going, "Yeah, Elijah, I didn't read that whole telegram until you did. I can't believe that she's doing this. I can't believe how powerful and tough Jezebel is. What are we going to do, Elijah?" God didn't do any of that. Instead, what he did is he heard Elijah and he gave him what he needed, which was rest. And he fed Elijah. He gave him sustenance. Now, he wasn't automatically cured from despair, as we're going to see in a couple of weeks. But allowing God to physically care for him gave Elijah strength to go on and to find the response that he's going to need. So in your despair, do you allow God to minister to you? Do you rest when you're tired? Do you eat like you should? Do you unplug from the things and maybe even the people that are putting you into a place of despair? Do you take the steps to keep moving? There's an old guy that used to play for the Yankees. And while I wouldn't say what he would say is scripture, Yogi Berra said some fun things. And one of the things that was just a very simple thing that he would always say is, "The game isn't over." In a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about how this battle continues. But the game isn't over. If you are in a place of despondency, depression, if you feel like there's no hope, understand, the game isn't over. What does success in your life look like to you? Because we've been told what success looks like by other people. You know, we're told that a successful Christian life is one that is defined about how good we are, how well behaved we can be. A successful church is usually evaluated by how many noses and nickels that they have. If a church has buildings and huge attendance and programs and budgets, big budgets and worship bands, how many books the pastor has written, how many church plants have we started. These are the churches that we are so quick to say they're the ones that are successful. But what happens is that we have to be cautious about our own faulty view of success. Whether it is in our life, whether it's in our ministry, we can get discouraged because we create this faulty view of success. And this is Elijah's issue. He had a faulty view of success. And he thought that the obliteration of Baal would end all the resistance to the Lord. But there was still going to be evil. He was looking for his success, and he forgot the battle. He forgot the victory. He forgot that the inevitable victory belongs to the Lord. The Lord never asked Elijah to go and win the battle and write the ending. He asked Elijah to be faithful and to accomplish the purpose that he had for Elijah. Remember, our measure of success, our measure of what should happen, is not ours to define. It's God's. And we're called to be faithful, to keep fighting when the odds oppose us, when opposition seems strong and obstacles are still in the road. In order for a helmsman to keep a ship's current course is an order that we should continue to hear in our lives. As we read through the Word, as we work together in service and ministry, as we're going out and living in this world where evil seems to be so predominant, steady as she goes. Steady as she goes. What's the last thing that God has told you to do? And have you done it? I want to encourage you, stay in His grip. Don't minimize His power and maximize man's evil. Keep Him the center of your vision. Do the things that He has for you to do. Let Him define what success is. The big victory has been won by Jesus on the cross, because there was no way that man could ever make himself right before a holy God. Our sin keeps us away from God. But Jesus came into this world, lived that perfect life, died on the cross. His blood an atonement for our sin. And then He rose from the grave to show that He was indeed one with His Father, and that we can truly trust Him, that we can remember that He has the ultimate victory. And if you have not experienced that ultimate victory in your life, I want to encourage you to pursue that, to go down that path, to be praying, what does that look like? Because if you're hearing my voice today telling you the gospel, that Jesus saves, understand, Jesus is wanting you to know that. Jesus saves. Politicians aren't going to save. Policy's not going to save. Great movements in this world is not going to save us. The only thing that saves us is Jesus. Respond to Him today if you haven't.